Ever wonder what everyone's doing on their phones? They're banking with Bank of America.
They're saving, planning, and budgeting all before dessert.
Digital tools so impressive, you just can't stop banking. What would you like the power to do?
Well, good morning, everyone. And thanks for that incredible opening, Sandy, and setting the stage. Look, the time is right for Detroit and Ann Arbor and the region. I mean, you are on, I know this, you are on everyone's radar as the region that has pulled itself up by its bootstraps, that has harnessed its energy, that has revitalized its downtown, and that is actually remaking America's greatest industry, the automotive industry, and more. I just want to thank Sandy and the Chamber and Chris Kolb and his colleagues at the University of Michigan with entrusting me with this task. You see the report here. You can go online, you can download it. And they asked me, it must have been back in the summer or early fall, would I be willing to take on this issue of how Detroit and Ann Arbor, two incredible places, could work together to forge a new innovation corridor. I jumped at the chance. And at the same time, over that period, I've been doing some work with our great friends at Michigan Central. I'm very honored to have some support from the Kresge Foundation, the great folks at the Kresge Foundation, to pursue some of this research on innovation and urban innovation. I jumped at the chance. Look, Sandy set it up beautifully. Detroit sat at the very center of the old world of innovation. It was a world in which big corporations drove the innovation economy. Back in the late 1940s, after the war, a then young Viennese immigrant to the United States named Peter Drucker set about to understand what was happening as the American economy rebuilt and retooled after the war. He undertook a study of Detroit and the Big Three. And in that study, published in 1948, he concluded that the core of Detroit was not an industrial powerhouse, was not just a manufacturing economy, was not just this constellation of great companies and suppliers, all of which are absolutely true. He argued that Detroit and the Big Three had pioneered a new kind of corporation, a new kind of economy, and a new kind of worker. The knowledge economy, the knowledge-based corporation, and the knowledge worker. That was not done in a study of IBM. That was not done in a study of high-tech companies in Silicon Valley. That was done in his original study of Detroit and its economy. You had and still have the world's greatest research and development laboratories run by corporations. Over time, those were moved to lovely suburban campuses, and corporations, and the great economist Joseph Schumpeter wrote about this, corporations defined a new model of innovation. Schumpeter said this. It was a corporate-sponsored, large and bureaucratic model of innovation, which he contrasted with small firm, highly dynamic, entrepreneurial innovation. And Schumpeter concluded, and Peter Drucker concluded, that if you didn't have that entrepreneurial impetus, if corporations alone drove the innovation process, if innovation was closed, that entrepreneurial dynamic might die down. Now, they didn't contrast Detroit, but they contrasted a city that I lived in when I taught at Carnegie Mellon for more than 20 years, Pittsburgh and New York. And they said that Pittsburgh would find itself in trouble eventually by the 1960s and 1970s because too much of its innovation was bottled up in large organizations. They contrasted it with New York, where entrepreneurial dynamism, set in motion by small firms and constant circulation of people. Now what we know is by the 1970s and 1980s, America set about to invent a whole new model of innovation. It grew up first in Silicon Valley out in California. It was followed very quickly in Boston, around the Route 128 Innovation Corridor. Places like Austin, Texas picked up on this. The Research Triangle. That new model, as Sandy said, was more open. It was a model where entrepreneurs, and I studied this, folks, back in the mid-1980s as a professor at Carnegie Mellon. I did detailed studies of this then new Silicon Valley model of innovation. I interviewed most of the founding entrepreneurs and all of the venture capitalists. And it was a model, as Sandy said, that was far more open, far more dynamic, and had universities at its very center. Stanford University was the impetus, with its research in computer science and engineering. A great dean, later provost there, Frederick Terman, who had come from MIT, understanding that he could harness funding from the Departments of Defense and the National Science Foundation and build what he called steeples of excellence and spin off companies, like one founded by his two students, Hewlett and Packard, and put them in an adjacent industrial park, research park, the Stanford Industrial Park. At MIT, concerned with the decline of the textile industry and the boot and shoe industry, people organized at MIT and Harvard the nation's first venture capital fund, American Research and Development, to combine technology coming out of MIT with the smarts of management kids at Harvard. And that model has been replicated, and it has grown, and it has become incredibly dynamic, making the US far and away the most innovation economy in the world. But when I dug into this corridor, I found something more amazing. There is very few places in the United States, in the world, that match the asset base in the Detroit to Ann Arbor innovation corridor. Sandy already mentioned $20 billion plus a year in corporate research and development. It's among the top 5 centers of corporate research and development in the United States. Only New York and San Francisco and a few other places do more, and a place like New York is 5 times larger in terms of population. $3 billion in university research, one of the top 3 centers for academic research in the United States. Recently, a group named Startup Genome, which tracks startups and entrepreneurial ecosystems across the world, and yes, Detroit and Ann Arbor lag behind San Francisco Bay Area, or Boston, or New York, or Los Angeles, London, Shanghai. But in their study done a couple of years ago, they flagged Detroit and Ann Arbor as the world's best emerging startup ecosystem. Sandy mentioned talent. The Detroit-Ann Arbor corridor, the university research corridor, which comprises the University of Michigan, Michigan State, and Wayne State University, produces more students every year than the Bay Area, Boston, Cambridge, Los Angeles, or any place on the United States. 100,000 undergraduates and 50,000 graduates. And when you look at this corridor in terms of the kind of people who do innovative work, I call them the creative class, people who work in knowledge-based industries, research and development, entrepreneurship. They can be college graduates. They don't have to be college graduates. They work in management, in STEM fields, in knowledge-based fields, in arts, entertainment. 1 million of those folks a year. Now, one thing that I've mentioned before, and I've written about in your local press, but it bears repeating, Detroit and Ann Arbor sometimes get a bad rap for not retaining talent. That's only partly true. If you take all of the 2- and 4-year universities in this region, and the fellow who did this is a fellow named Jonathan Rothwell, who was at Brookings and now at the Gallup organization, an incredible young social scientist. He took LinkedIn data, which shows where young people go to university and then where they move. The Detroit metropolitan area, including Ann Arbor, has one of the highest overall rates of talent retention in the country. Roughly 80%, 75 to 80% of the young people who go to school here stay in the region. But, and this is a critical but, people coming out in critical fields like artificial intelligence, computer science, software, chemical engineering related to the new energy and battery technologies. People in those critical fields, young people in those super important fields, those are the ones most likely to leave, not because they don't like it here. This place offers incredible affordable quality of life, the excitement of downtown and its comeback, great college towns, great suburbs to live. They tend to leave because the opportunities to work on the most exciting projects or to make more money or elsewhere. This is what the corridor can help us staunch. And I want to point out something that I think is critically important. And I don't think this has been obvious to people outside of the Bay Area, outside of Boston, outside of a few places. Not obvious here, not obvious in a lot of other regions, especially in this great heartland of the United States. If you look at any great innovation region or any great innovation economy, it's comprised of two things. Not just a great city and metropolitan area. It is a great city and metropolitan area combined with a great college town. And this is why the corridor is so darn important. There would be no Silicon Valley if there was just San Francisco. San Francisco was a great place to be. If you wanted to play in a rock and roll band, if you wanted to live an alternative lifestyle, you wanted to hang out in the Haight-Ashbury. The innovation impetus for the Bay Area didn't come from San Francisco. It came from a little small college town named Palo Alto, where Stanford University was located. And that's where the startups started trickling out of. And that's where the venture capitalists organized themselves in that industrial park on Sand Hill Road. And that created the spark that spread growth throughout the region. Boston would have been a declining manufacturing center. Boots and shoes would have left, textiles would have declined, and Boston would have fell down. It was Cambridge, Massachusetts, that powered the growth of Boston. It was Harvard and MIT that spurred the technology revolution. Out on the West Coast more recently, it was Boulder in combination with Denver. In North Carolina, the Research Triangle, two college towns, Durham and Chapel Hill, combined with a bigger city called Raleigh. And people say, well, Austin and Columbus are the come-ups. They're the ones we're competing against. We looked at this. We have charts and data. This metropolitan area, now, if you look at Ann Arbor is dwarfed by Austin and Columbus. But when you look at the combined Detroit-Ann Arbor corridor, it's more than 2 times larger. It takes a great college town, I should say this, or great college towns, plus a great metro to make an innovation economy. That's why this corridor is an important first step. And I just want to echo what Sandy said. We don't touch on this in the report, and hopefully it'll be a follow-up. But Sandy mentioned, I live in Toronto. My main academic appointment is at the University of Toronto. My wife's family is from here. My kids are dual citizens. They consider Toronto and Greater Detroit to be parts of their homes. Talk to President Ono, who's a proud Canadian working in the United States. You can think of no better place, no place with more assets in the world, not just in the United States, than this corridor from Ann Arbor to Detroit over, as Sandy said, to Waterloo and to Toronto. And I think that could be an important next step. I'm certainly committed to it as someone who spends time between the two, as someone who flew yesterday from Toronto to Windsor and just hopped across the bridge. Now, Sandy said you need to organize yourself. This is absolutely critical. The report goes into it, talks about some organizational forms you can take, but I don't want to prescribe that. And what I've learned, whether it's Silicon Valley or the Bay Area, whether it's Boston, Route 128, whether it's Austin, Texas, every place organized themselves differently. Some place the university leads, sometimes the great foundation leads, sometimes the civic sector leads, sometimes industry leads. But you need a mechanism. I called it an alliance of business leadership, academic leadership, civic leadership that focuses laser sharp on how to pull these assets together, because the competition is getting stiffer. More places are organizing themselves. Austin, the Research Triangle, Miami and South Florida, the rise of the rest places, but not just in the United States, across the world, from Shanghai to Beijing to London to Stockholm, Toronto, Vancouver. All of these places want to play in the innovation economy. Look, I can think of no better place on the planet that has the kind of assets you do, that can pull them together and build a new innovation economy that's not just creating the next new high-tech wonder thing, that's creating great wealth and riches for venture capitalists and high-tech barons, but which can help transform a great industry like auto as it repositions itself to advance mobility. And look at what's happened here. That can, and Sandy mentioned, a system of innovation and production that lifted up the working classes, like my father, with a 7th grade education who worked in a factory. What you are poised to do in this corridor is pioneer a new kind of model of innovation, which is highly innovative and vibrant, based on new technology, but which can lift up more boats and actually be place-based and inclusive and lift up more segments of the community. Thank you so much, Chamber and others, for entrusting me with this project. All of you know I'm committed to this and would be delighted to work on proceeding further with you in these efforts. Thanks so much.
Ever wonder what everyone's doing on their phones? They're banking with Bank of America.
They're saving, planning, and budgeting all before dessert.
Digital tools so impressive, you just can't stop banking. What would you like the power to do?